Welcome everyone to part 3 of the Klingon Academy Starship Overview. Today we're taking a look at the Lyrans Star Empire, which, just like the Gorn, don't exactly have too many ships. Now personally, again, I would suggest using actual SFB models to supplement the boats here. Because, well, you're seeing an awful lot of rapidity here. This happens to be the Marine Transport, the Servo class. My personal favorite, the Bobcat, is a reuse of the Wildcat frame, which is also a reuse of the Lynx class. The Queen Cat is a dilithium freighter. Actually, I'm pretty sure that the Felidae would serve pretty well as another fighter, as a pseudo-fighter tender. More on that later. The Feline is the colony ship, while the Cougar class, well, kind of obvious, it's a cargo ship. They don't have an awful lot of starship variety, though they could use the models from SFB to bulk up the fleet numbers. Shoot me. Just, everything wants to go wrong. It just wants to go wrong. My frustration is showing, isn't it? Just everything wants to go wrong today. Alright, let's take a look at the combat ships before anything else goes horribly wrong. As you can see, the Wildcat and Bobcat have very much the same model, which is a modification of the Lynx model. The standard frigate, and my personal favorite, and one of my favorite ships from the Lyran lineup. Because, you know, it looks a lot like the heavy cruiser in a way. I didn't like the Caracal because it just looks so simple. Of course, you're going to be seeing a bit of a problem with the entire Lyran lineup. They use a lot of mixed weapons. Too many, if you ask me. See, the Caracal has a lot of disruptor cannons, but they also have mega phasers. You see, from a lore and logistician point of view, from the lore point of view, you don't see disruptor using powers using phasers at all. From a logistician's point of view, and I do dabble in logi, I'm looking at it and going, why the hell are you using two different kinds of weapons? Well, that's just going to make your engineers angry. Your engineers are your friends. You don't make them angry. You simplify things for them. You make their lives easier. So from a logistician's point of view, them using phasers doesn't make any sense. Disruptors, sure. But again, I will be bringing up with Squire James and coming up with a lore excuse as to why beam disruptors are still a thing. I'm very good at this sort of thing. I want to make him happy, while also being somewhat compliant with actual lore and common sense. Then there's the weird part. See, the Leopard is the light cruiser, but it has less weapons than the Caracol. Again, gonna have to bring that up with him. And then, of course, there's the Tiger, which is just as more confusing and has even less weapons than the... Actually has equal amount of weapons. Just swaps out a couple of disruptors for the Mega Phasers again. Still, I like the Tiger for one simple reason. It looks kind of like a pouncing cat. And as someone who is deeply missing his angry little fuzzball, I miss my cat. She was angry. And fuzzy. And adorable. But before my depression gets any worse, you can understand why the destroyer having more guns than the heavy cruiser confuses me. The Puma class is actually a conversion of the advanced cruiser from Orion Pirates, the X-era ships. The Panther is where we finally get access to bigger guns, and where the Caracol finally becomes obsolete. Why? That is a lot of heavy disruptors, a lot of disruptor cannons, and depressingly a lot of Mega Phasers. Again, gonna bring that up with him. The Lion used to be the battleship of, well, SFC. The Dreadnought and the battleship used the same models. And this thing has a huge number of heavy weapons that the logistician in me is going, why? Why? The disruptors I get. Just not the Mega Phasers. However, this one I do get. The Mauler cannon. See, the Mauler, according to SFB lore, was actually developed by the Romulans. Again, I will be discussing possible alterations with him, but I'm gonna be nice. The Royal Lion is evil. Just pure evil. It has more Mega Phasers. More disruptor cannons. It's evil. And their heavy weapon, which you start seeing on the Tiger class, the expanding sphere generator, is basically a Corbomite reflector without the reflector, and has two modes: defensive, which makes you impossible to destroy, and offensive, which allows you to ram things. And let's not forget the Lioness. Now, I'm pretty sure they do have a fighter tender, but in this case, they're pseudo-fighters. Why are they pseudo-fighters? Because Lyran weapons, because the Lyrans wanted bigger guns. But they didn't want to miniaturize, so they just made big ships. Now, the Lioness can only carry about 6 of these things, but considering that their shields can regenerate and they're basically nastier than anything short of, well, anything developed by the next faction on the list, you can understand why these things are pure evil. But, speaking of the next faction, as far as I'm concerned, and not incorrectly so, they are the most broken faction in the freaking game. Now you may be wondering, why would he say this? Why would he declare the Hydrans the most broken, overpowered faction in the game? You know, I never really noticed this, but the Merchant class cargo ship just looks like a Federation cargo ship from Armada II, with a pair of Hydran warp missiles strapped on. In fact, I'm seeing a little bit of that with every single one of these ships, though, again, because of Orion Pirates, plus, and their custom models, well, can't entirely be sure. That said, I know this is actually a canon model for them. I've seen it in SFC1. Again, can't be sure, but colony ship, construction ship, dilithium freighter, repair ship, kleptomaniacs. Now, again, you're probably wondering, why am I constantly saying that these are the most this is the most broken faction in the entire game? Well, that answer is rather depressing, but it's the truth. For you see, rather annoyingly, with the exception of the Archer class, which is their scout frigate, every single one of these things is a carrier. The Yeoman has a pair of Fusilier fusion beam Hellbiter fusion beam fighters. So these things have the ability to launch their fighters. Okay. I know you're asking the question. How does this make them horribly broken? Because those fighters don't have a leash. For reasons I fail to understand, not only can they bypass asteroid fields, they can attack you out of weapons range. I've actually had that happen a few times. Every single one of these things has at least 2 fighters at their disposal. And they keep respawning them. I hate these things the most because their Hellbores have exceptionally long range. And they're able to pound my defensive facilities without the defenses being able to fire back, which I find absolutely ridiculous. And the Hydrans have even less fleet variety because all of these ships I recognize. They come from SFC2, though the Duke might be questionable because I'm not entirely sure if that's the X-Era ship or a kit bash. That said, it could be said that the Hydrans could also steal some Klingon designs. Now, why do I say this? Look at the Baron, and tell me you cannot see influences from the D7. I can see the Hydrans stealing every starship they can get their hands on from the Klingons and repurposing them. In fact, that might be a good way to bulk up their fleet numbers. Just say, hi, we're using Klingon designs. Because they're captured, and we don't have a choice. And we have to make our own starships. Anyway, all of these things are evil. Because every single one of them is a carrier. I'm not entirely sure about the pikemen. It does look like it's for Orion pirates. But this thing's a hellbore monitor that fires long-range hellbores at people. So it's their version of the artillery ship. Just like the Puma is the long-range artillery ship for the Lyrans. Regardless, the Hydrans are broken as a faction. They're the most overpowered units because their fighters have no leash. They can bypass obstacles and hit you in the face. I have had entire Hydran fleets trying to bum rush me from the other side. There are walls keeping the enemies from trying to kill me. And they just send their fighters, because their fighters have no leash. And they can attack my base. They've actually destroyed my star base on more than one occasion because there are just so many fighters. That's how broken they are. And why I have recommended to Squire that every faction, every single faction, has access to a escort carrier. Because fleet carriers take too long to research and build. So you're going to need something to counteract the Hydran fighter spam. If you can't give them a leash, give the star bases access to fighters, so they can, fight the fighters. Or give access to lighter escort carriers, for example, the Matsumoto for the Federation. A nice STO reference there, by the way. And just counteract the fighter spam. Because these guys have a fighter obsession. And they're the most overpowered faction in the game for that reason alone. Next, we move on to the final playable factions. But that's next time. Housecoat Gaming, signing off.